Hello and welcome to Recovery Machine. I'm Nathan and this is my co-host Corey.
Hey, Nathan.
Today we're on episode 4 where we discuss personality traits that we found have made us more vulnerable, I guess you could say, Corey, to falling prey to addiction. We're going to go through and look at some of the different personality traits that contribute to substance abuse disorder and try to pick apart some of this stuff as we go, because there's a lot of kind of myths, I guess, surrounding this topic, and lots to discuss. Yeah. So I guess we'll start with what traits we've kind of run across in our journey of recovery that have been important to understand, not only to kind of be aware of what's the way that our minds work in regard to substance use, and kind of the things that set us up for potential pitfalls or traps that kind of increase your risk as you go along. So they're kind of important parts of our personalities that have to be addressed and monitored. What kind of stuff, I know you talked about this a little bit before, Corey, in our last meeting there. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the personality traits that you think contributed to not only developing an addiction, but that have made you kind of aware of where you might run into trouble?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've talked about a few of these traits in our previous episodes as well. But some of them bear some repeating. The first one I'll mention for myself is sensitivity. And I think one of the themes that we're going to recognize that within this discussion is that there are a lot of terms that get thrown around about personality traits and traits of those who are addicted, that they're often either misused or misunderstood terms. So sensitivity for me, growing up, I always thought that meant that that I was soft, or that I cried easily, or that I took things personally. But it more accurately means for me that I take on the pain of others. And within the context of a healthcare setting, that means a big burden and a huge risk of cumulative pain that I'm experiencing from other people, and that can be painful for myself.
Right.
So that would be one. We've talked about perfectionism as well, and perfectionism, as we said in I think both of our introductory episodes, is more accurately the feeling that you're not enough, and that the more we take on, it doesn't really matter because it will never be enough.
That's right. Yep.
So an interesting theme with both of those things for me is negative self-talk, and the story that I tell myself, the narrative voice that is sometimes accompanying my other thoughts, and sometimes it's much more powerful than that, and it's a guiding thought that is telling me negative things about myself, or negative things about my experience, or what could happen in any given scenario.
Like what kind of what would be an example of a negative thought that you'd have while you were working?
Oh, it could be that something bad is going to happen, that myself and my coworkers are going to be in a compromised position, that we're not safe. Now, sometimes some of these things are true, or they were confirmed with experience. But just because they happened in past experiences doesn't necessarily mean that they'll happen again. But in the story that I was telling myself, they were going to happen again for sure.
Okay.
And I couldn't convince myself otherwise.
So an almost unrealistic emphasis on negative events or catastrophizing things that haven't occurred, although they have a chance of occurring, but you're putting too much weight on them, that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. And then not only that, but then I think that also contributed to, being on edge and a level of anxiety. And I don't know that I could parse how much of the anxiety existed without the self-talk, but it was certainly that state of anxiety. The rumbling beehive that we've spoken of was fed by that self-talk and egged on by it.
Yeah, absolutely. I get that. Yeah, we're similar in a lot of these ways, as we've discussed. It's a weird thing, especially the perfectionism issue, because it actually wasn't for me. It took me a long time to kind of figure that out. Ironically, I just kind of always assumed that I wasn't good enough to be a perfectionist, which is, of course, ridiculous, which is the very nature of the problem itself. It has nothing to do with that. It's an unrealistic kind of, you've got a goalpost that can never be reached. And for me, when I coupled that with, working in an environment that was already difficult to achieve just the kind of baseline standard, then I often had that kind of negative feedback that you're talking about there. And it would be, I could have a really good day, and, maybe I helped 10 people. I went above what I had to do and I helped 10 people. And I felt good about what I did there, but I didn't have time for one. And it wasn't the 10 people I was thinking about, it was the one. And this kind of imbalanced feedback is a lot of the nature of well, at least a good part of my negative kind of outlook problem that I've been working on. I have to make an effort, and I am making an effort. I'm getting better at this, but you have to recognize your W's as much as your L's,
Yeah.
You feel the same way about that?
Oh yeah. And in certain circumstances, particularly within the healthcare setting, it can be hard to find that W, so to speak.
Yeah.
But even I recognize that even situations where there was a positive outcome or where I got positive feedback, for some people, I think that would be the boost of confidence that could give them some energy, give them kind of the supportive kick to keep them going throughout the day. Mm-hmm. But even if it wasn't something that I beat myself up over, I don't think I got that big boost or that big kick from it, because I would have this lingering self-doubt.
That's right. And instead of, like you said, getting a kick, it's just like you tell yourself, okay, well, you did your job.
Yeah, that's right.
Good for you.
That's
Move
right.
on.
So that kind of fits into the category of neuroticism.
It does. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So can you speak to neuroticism a little bit?
Well, I think it's just that. It's I think in myself, I tend towards I'm the darkness comes easy to me, and I have to work hard at seeing the light. That's just kind of the way I'm set up. And it took me a long time to figure out that that's not the optimal way to operate. So an effort must be made by myself on a constant basis to train my mind, retrain my mind to see the good, not just in myself, but I have to look hard for the good in the world. I have to see it in people, because I can go sour on everything real fast. So I have to constantly be cultivating that. And it's not because I'm trying to, be some happy-go-lucky guy. It's because I realize that this is the better way to live for me. If I, these kind of, my attitude impacts every aspect of my life. And nobody is going to be able to help me with that unless I'm going to put the effort into doing something about it. Right. So it took me quite a while to figure that out. And I'm happy that, I've got the understanding of it finally to at least make an effort. And it doesn't take a whole lot. Like, I believe that the mind is is more malleable that way than maybe we used to think, where you'd be kind of pigeonholed in whatever, Briggs Meyer setup you were given at birth type of thing. Yeah. And I think there's more evidence now suggesting you can be moved along those spectrums a little more than we thought. I certainly see that in myself. So, and then just the baseline anxiety, I think, is part of it. That's a big driver with my substance use in general. I think definitely in the beginning, because I just didn't understand that wasn't what everyone else was experiencing, and therefore it made sense for me to latch on to whatever made it go away. And I mean, that is not nearly as bad as it was when I was a teenager or a young adult, but it's still there. So a lot of this stuff is it's being aware of what's going on in your own mind, and there's a lot going on in there all the time that we can't possibly keep track of everything. And the best we can do is just pick out a few areas that are important, and then try to cultivate kind of a better road in those key areas. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. There's, maybe, for me, it would be the perfectionism, the neuroticism. And then the other one that I think that gets me often in healthcare is, because this is what I believe is going on, because I find it difficult to achieve like a kind of happy state, right? What would you call, I guess, dysthymic, naturally a little dysthymic. So I run a little lower than most naturally. So when I see somebody who comes along and I realize that I can make an impact in their life that is going to affect their happiness, I place a high value on that impact, to the extent that I'm putting myself last. So I'll go out of my way to try and make that person's day better, which is great. I mean, it sounds great, but the problem is, if you multiply that by 10 or 100 and, day after day after day, it accumulates, and you realize that you're actually not doing anybody a service, because it's another fast route to burnout, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that person that you're holding in a higher esteem may themselves be struggling and battling some form of neuroses or negative self-talk too. But it may just manifest itself in a different way.
Yeah.
The thing that comes to mind for me in the research that I've done in prep for this is that all of these terms have stigma attached in one way or another. And the term neurotic gets thrown around as a sort of a pseudo insult. And, for someone who's worried, or someone who might ruminate, or someone who, the fretful, hand-wringing person. And that can very often get thrown around. Well, don't be so neurotic. But
yeah, you're right.
This is a very, very normal mental health processes that is on a spectrum, in my opinion. So, for me, a lot of the sort of sub definitions of neuroses don't necessarily fit me, but the one that really related to me was rumination. And that rumination for me, again, I can think back to childhood when that was a part of my life. But the part that where it became really challenging and where it started to interfere with work is the notion, the adage of don't bring work home. So it becomes really difficult when you're mulling and ruminating over something that happened, particularly if it's something traumatic or something that was complicated or had a bad outcome or left you with a lot of doubt or negative self-talk. So that rumination might have been throughout the course of a shift, and then it was there coming home and caused me not to sleep, and then or changed my, affected my appetite, oh God, I could think of, and that could be a cascade that could go down until the next day back at work again.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Don't bring it home. That's like I mean, for you nurses who are in acute care, that's like telling an Iraq veteran, like, okay, the war's over. Job's over. Just leave it.
Yeah.
Leave it alone.
Yeah, that's right.
It's all good. Move on with your life.
Yeah.
Easier said than done for a lot of people, right?
Probably for most people. But if you have some of these preset personality traits going into it, the challenge is certainly greater, for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's a really cool observation you made about the stigma of all these different things that we picked out. I didn't consider that, and I'm looking at this list, and I'm like, huh, yeah, you could say that about every single one of them.
Yeah.
They're all things that in society would be kind of like, get it together, or shape up. They're not scathing insults, but they're kind of like toughen up type shit, right?
They are, and these are characteristics that do exist within people that have addiction in their lives, and there are characteristics of people who don't.
Yeah,
and I think it speaks to the universal experience of humankind that again, on that spectrum, we're all kind of there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's totally the way I see it too.
Yeah.
So this next question here is one that I can remember discussing since I was a kid. I mean, I think the first time I ran into it, I was probably 11 or 12, something like that. Somebody said that they have an addictive personality. And it's a term that gets kind of tossed around everywhere. You see it. It was really, really popular, I think, in the 90s. And then there was some kind of backlash against that term, because I think the evidence hasn't really panned out just definition wise. And because in the psychological sciences, they have a lot of trouble setting up studies that don't get lost in semantics. And I think that because there's never been really a solid kind of binding definition of what an addictive personality is, it kind of got just kicked along, and finally everyone got frustrated, and okay, well, I guess we're just going to keep it as this kind of it's almost like a slang term for you're going to get in trouble with drugs, right? Yeah. But when we look into it and look at some of the different personality traits, comorbid conditions, and factors that have been studied towards that end, we see that even though, technically there's no such thing as an addictive personality, there is an addictive personality, and that there's those kind of spectrums that we talk about. I think empirically we can say, just from our own experience and what we've seen, that if enough of those dials line up in the right way, you're of course going to have more issues. You're more set up to run into trouble. So, I guess, these are. I guess we could talk about what we've seen as far as different personality traits that have kind of influenced people's behavior towards drugs and alcohol. And I think we've discussed it. Is there anything else you would add personally as far as your own personality is concerned?
Well, I mean, I think so. One of the ones that we haven't touched on would be impulsivity.
Yes.
Impulsivity and sort of the tendency towards a compulsive self-soothing behavior. I mean, now a compulsive self-soothing behavior could be, eating, could be shopping, could be, various things on the internet. And the compulsive part of that being, that it becomes a repetitive thing, a repetitive go-to to soothe whatever process is happening in the mind, be it negative self-talk, be it depression, be it perfectionism, sensitivity, pain. So that would be one thing that comes to mind. The piece with impulsivity. Now, this is interesting because I think that impulsivity is something that can be corrected or can change, certainly within the process of recovery. So, we've talked about that kind of feeling of ambivalence about the world and what's going on, and that if there is no point to this, and as the process of depression occurs and continues to take hold, that level of impulsivity, I think, does go up, because that voice in your head is telling you, who gives a shit, Corey? Just go for it, whatever.
Yeah.
And then I think as you start to gain, as I gained my life back and gained things that connected me and that brought me peace, brought me happiness, and as I gained some of the tools to handle that self-talk, that need for impulsive behavior, or that voice that was saying, to hell with it, certainly quieted down and got easier to manage. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. I'm just thinking about what you're talking about here, and it makes sense when you look at, it's not commonly known that the majority of people who have trouble with drugs and alcohol just naturally, without treatment or help, eventually kind of grow out of it. They call it spontaneous recovery, but it's not it's not really as miraculous as is claimed otherwise.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of that, one thing we know, like for women, the number one factor in spontaneous recovery is childbirth. So when a woman has a baby, her perspective and priorities change, which is an important part of it. And with that, I think there's an emotional maturity that probably would have happened naturally anyway, but that you think of like real impulsivity. You can think of a kid, where there's very little ability to delay gratification, and that impulsivity can be nurtured, or it can be just fed into, so that, by the time you're an adult, you're still that impulsive. You just, whatever you want, you're going after it immediately. So I think there's, as that is a kind of natural factor that can be developed naturally as you age. Eventually, I think humans have a tendency towards less impulsivity as we go along. And the other factors that kind of tie into that would be like thrill-seeking behavior, or seeking out novel experiences. So that would, for me, novel experiences was a big draw to drugs in the first place, like especially as a teenager, because I think I got jaded towards the world real quick, and drugs gave me another chance at kind of living in a place that was new, and it gave me something else to explore, and because in my mind, I'd already explored enough of the real world, which is, that's a ridiculous thing, but that's what my mind state was at the time.
Yeah, sure. I think about, with impulsivity, anyone who has seen the downtown east side of Vancouver and seen, or in any of the many, many, many communities in our province that have a high number of people who are experiencing homelessness, and a lot of the judgment and criticism of that behavior that you can see if you're driving by or walking by, kind of comes down to impulsivity. And I think back to our conversation a couple of episodes ago about the inability to see long term, that things become about the short term.
Yeah.
And you will look at someone doing whatever and say, well, why would they do that to themselves? Why would they take that risk? Why would they go and steal? Why would they, go to the bathroom on the side of the road? Don't they care? Well, that the long-term consequences are out the window. And again, it's all very, very short term. and it, without that lens of understanding, it can, that, I think judgment creeps in really, really fast with that kind of behavior. And I know that even in a more sort of normative way, the behavior that I exhibited at work of taking a drug off the counter is really, really hard to understand.
Mm-hmm.
But I look at the people on the downtown east side of Vancouver and say, it's not quite as hard for me to understand now.
Yeah, and rightly so. Those people, a lot of those people, their entire life. I've read, I think it was one of Gabor Mate's books, maybe Hungry Ghosts, or I can't remember which one, but he talks about there's a 9 or 10-year-old girl there that basically was raised on the east side, and her mother started her on heroin at 11 because she needed her to be a prostitute to help with covering rent, right? So you look at somebody, to me, that's a level of front loading the brain that is the absolute, an extreme example of what happens when this person basically never had a chance, as in her mind would be so front loaded towards that drug, not only as a priority, but as, it would be your God, basically, right? Because all through her developmental stages, she would have never known a time where that wasn't the only solace she ever had. So, it would be hard to get into somebody's brain and actually feel what that's like, that level of not just of, because you have to take away all your understanding of what goes on. You take away your education, you take away your proper childhood, you take away nutrition, you stack the deck so hard in one direction, and then you can't, it would be a miraculous event to have that person come around. It's just, the chances of it happening are, I don't know. I've seen people's stories. I've seen way worse stories than that, actually horrendous. You wouldn't think there is anything worse than that. But sometimes when I see people like that, I just think, man, why don't we just give this person, they deserve to have a place to sleep where they're not in danger. They deserve some food, and maybe just get them whatever drug they want until they can get enough stability in their life so they can figure which way is up, Yeah. To try and wrap your head around somebody who's in that state is tough to do. But like you said, it is the same problem. It's just the extreme version of it.
Yeah. But that same front loading, that same short-term front loading exists for the person with, compulsive overeating, or the shopaholic, quote unquote, or the cigarette smoker, or the alcohol consumer who wants that voice of saying enough is enough. I've had enough. I'll put this down, or I can walk away. Once a malfunction happens there, we're talking about virtually the same thing. Again, on a spectrum, but it is. So I think to see ourselves, this is the kind of the, if you want to call it beautiful or not, the universal part of human existence is that these are kind of the same things that we're talking about.
They are the same thing. Yeah. And I think that's really tough for people to see, because especially now, I think society has never been more, there's just such a push towards division, and humans already have that natural tendency. We have us, them ingrained in our nature, and we love to put up walls between each other And when you see somebody, like said, who's on the street, and you're like, oh my God, like, what is wrong with that person? You don't relate to that person in a way that, you think, well, that could be me. That's not, a lot of people don't allow for that to happen. They see it as something far away or something completely alien, but I don't believe that's the case.
No.
And judging by, well, what did we do here? You said October, 201 overdose. So we're new record for BC last month. The numbers continue to climb. You compare the money spent on what's going on with our infectious disease problem. I'll call it that. Yeah. Compared to what's being done to, and the thing is with the opioid crisis is we're losing people. The majority of the people we're losing are in the like 25 to 45 age bracket. Yeah. These are people who still have a lot to offer potentially. We're losing people that otherwise could have had maybe are having a very positive impact, and then they go out early. Like was a couple of years ago, one of the universities in BC lost their dean, and I think it was hydromorph that got him. And this complete shock and surprise to everybody. And but this is what's going on, and it's not. I mean, yes, we have a problem with a big problem with fentanyl and access to methamphetamine, and the combination right now is particularly dangerous and insidious and cheap. But there's a lot more than that going on that is contributing to this problem.
Yeah. Yeah, there is. And I mean, if you think about 201 deaths from opioids in October, and let's say conservatively that each of those person had 5 people in their lives that cared about them. Maybe it's a fractured relationship. Maybe it's from a distance, but that there were 5 people who knew who they were. And that's conservative. There would be some that would have, 20, 30 people who knew who they were or had lost them. So now we're talking about numbers that are in the thousands. And that's, if you think about the ripple effect, the impact of that, it's a lot of lives impacted, and the impact of trauma. And
I've seen estimates where the average is around 200 people impacted by an early death like that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, eventually when you're stacking up those kind of numbers per month in a province of only, like, what is there, 4 million of us here, something like that? I haven't looked in a while, but there's not that many of us to have that kind of continual radiating, pulsing. There should be alarm bells going on.
Yeah.
That should be, in my mind, that should be for the last 2.5 years more. It should have been way more. It should be in the public eye to the extent that our infectious disease friend is times 10.
Yeah, it should. It should. I wanted to circle back for a moment to the statement about novel experience. That is a trait, or the seeking of novel experience, rather. And I think back to emergency departments that I've worked in and encountered, and particularly in the larger centers that are very much prone to receiving trauma patients and like a high acuity, the sickest of the sick kind of a thing for whatever community. If you did a personality poll on all of the staff that work there, of all of the let's say nurses and doctors that work there, and even support staff, I think that the boxes that would be checked off would be like all down the line. Seeking of novel experiences is certainly one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And
thrill seeking too, right? A lot of people in acute trauma are kind of like, they like that adrenaline hit.
Yeah, and it's again, it becomes a badge of honor.
Mhm.
and it becomes something that that valor and virtue are attached to.
Yeah.
Uh, Understandably, to some degree, because you've just saved a life, or throughout the course of a day, you've helped umpteen people get better from a life-threatening health issue. So there is virtue in that, and there is valor in that. I don't want to take that away, but there are also common personality traits that do put that population of healthcare workers at risk.
Yeah. Well, it's higher stakes gambling. If you're a healthcare professional and you're after, I mean, as a pharmacist, like in comparison, my job satisfaction is hilarious, right? Like maybe I helped somebody get access to a medication that they couldn't afford. Maybe I changed a medication that made somebody feel a little bit better, or maybe it's a little more effective for them, whatever. It's very rare that I'm going to be, having that kind of a large scale impact on their existence, right? Whereas in your department, you're gambling with all your chips on the table all the time. So you might, okay, right on, we saved 3 people today, but you miss one, and it's not, especially if you're somebody who's sensitive to other people's pain and suffering. I mean, I don't think it would take very long before, a few traumatic deaths start to kind of have an impact on you that's hard to shake, and we see that.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think we got, openness to experience, kind of the same thing. Everyone's got a different level of, like, I think we've discussed where you can have individuals where they're checking off all the boxes. They look like they would be susceptible to getting into trouble with drugs and alcohol, but their refusal to be open to new experiences saved them, because they're just not that type of person. They're not gonna try smoking weed. They don't even want to mess with booze, and you see these type of people, and it's an interesting kind of thing, because I can't identify them. I can't identify with them personally on that level, because I'm very open to new experiences and have been all my life. So, there's benefits and obviously drawbacks to having that trait, but it's interesting that you can have that one single kind of attribute, and it can keep you out of a lot of trouble.
It's true. And I mean, it speaks to how we are all 1 or 2 decisions away from changing our lives for better or for worse. And if, in the case of encountering drugs or alcohol or putting ourselves at risk, it's, it could be as simple as that. In episode 1, I spoke of, the manager who told me you're far too sensitive to go into a field of nursing where you're going to be taking on that much pain from the general public.
Mm-hmm.
And had I listened to her, the course of my life would have been very, very different. And being able to sort of turn that lens towards myself and so, but we make decisions for various reasons, and we'll kind of come to that near the end about what to do about that. But that's certainly something I reflect on. So Nathan, can I ask you this next question here? You mentioned dysthymia at the beginning of our discussion here. Mm-hmm. So what was the role that dysthymia, depression, and anxiety played in the development of your addiction?
Okay. Well, anxiety I discussed in a previous episode, and I think that was like what we talked about with the beehive there. It was whatever the cause was. Maybe there was no cause. Maybe it's just genetic. I don't know. But I seem to have a low grade, just kind of constant angst, and it's totally not something that's overwhelming, but it's enough of an annoyance that when you run into something that takes it away, you notice. So in that respect, I think that's what really, the first time I had alcohol, or the first time I got drunk, I guess, was when I was 13, maybe. And that was the biggest, that was the takeaway, it was like, wow, that took that away. Like I didn't feel that. And I was like, I didn't even know that was possible. Right. So it's like a kind of like a form of magic to be able to do that. So that of course makes it much more attractive. Now, if you had somebody who doesn't have that happening, and that, maybe that wouldn't have been such a hook. That's a fairly straightforward one for me to understand. The dysthymia, again, I think is something that kind of took me a little bit to figure out and kind of be okay with the way that my mind functions. Because, overall, I feel quite blessed with my brain works properly, even though I beat the hell out of it for however many years.
Yeah.
I've had massive concussions, been punched in the head, and yet here I am. I'm still able to string words together and have a cohesive thought. So I'm very, I'm happy about that. And if I have to deal with a little bit of not feeling as happy generally as other people, that's fine. I can deal with that. But again, I think because maybe it makes it a little bit, I think it plays into like we discussed, anhedonia. So I get less of a thrill out of things that would maybe thrill other people a little more. Just on a, if you look at a bell curve, it would maybe take a little bit more of a pleasure item to get me going,
Yeah.
And
same.
Yeah. So because of that, drugs naturally, I mean, that's one of the things they do is they switch the perspective and kind of increase whatever, they put a spin on whatever you're doing. So I think there was an immediate realization that with drugs, I was able to, kind of get more of a thrill like a normal person would. It could be anything. You're going on a roller coaster, and now it's like 10 times more fun. Like that became the thing where I was constantly trying to not only shake the dysthymia, but get past it and above it.
Yeah.
So there's that, and then for me, I think that depression maybe I think was brought on a lot by drug use, especially towards when I really started to run into trouble. And then, like I mentioned before, I think I ran into a particularly rough patch in my early 30s, and was just not equipped or prepared. I had been living a hedonistic lifestyle, and I just didn't have the armor, so I wasn't even really aware of what was going on with me. I was just kind of clicking along one fun thing to the next. And all of a sudden things weren't fun anymore. And I was like, okay, well, so that coupled with, eventual whatever problems that I had going on in my life at the same time made it so that, now I needed a lot just to feel normal, it seemed. And that's where opiates just kind of fit like a glove. Get the opiates going, and it doesn't really matter what your problem is, right? You're back in, and away you go.
So was it a coping issue with you, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I was not, because I had, it kind of like, I've been living too soft, not doing it's like getting into a fight, you could say, and you took 2 years off the gym and you're doing no training whatsoever. And you wonder why you're gassed in the first 20 seconds. That's kind of what it was like. I was not prepared for the battle that was coming. And because of that, I basically started leaning on whatever I could lean on to get through. Right. Yeah. And opiates were the the solution to that at that time.
Yeah. I think about it, that makes a whole lot of sense to me. I've the thing that came to mind was that I've labeled myself, looking back at the time when I was addicted, as being fairly high functioning, in that I kept all of like the material aspects of my life together. But I didn't do it while still being able to keep my mental health together. And
well, that is the trick, isn't it?
well, like that's a huge losing battle, a huge uphill battle that, you do hear, you've mentioned this before, that you do hear stories of people who are able to use substances for a really, really, really long time in their lives. Or, I think of the poet William Burroughs, who was doing drugs until he was in his 80s. Or Willie Nelson, who smoked pot until he was in his mid 80s here. And I'm making an assumption here that those people weren't impacted by that sort of depressing effect of some of these substances, and like that lowered mood, that state of anhedonia, the inability to experience joy and pleasure and happiness.
Well, most people can use drugs recreationally. Like, it's not, drugs are dangerous. Okay. But drugs themselves are not the problem. That's the way I look at it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason why people can use, like, there's people out there who can use hard opiates recreationally.
Yeah. And
to me, that's bananas. I can't put, that's just not something I can do, but it's just the way that they're set up mentally and genetically, so that it's, it just doesn't have the same hook or allure. And, I look at, you look at, Willie Nelson, I guess you can use him as an example. What more do you want? Like, the guy is a successful artist. He seems to be happy. He's got good friendships. He's very successful. So if he wants to smoke pot, I think smoke pot, Willie, that's great. I have no, I think there's, for some people, it's about what works for you. And I like that, my dad has a question that he asks whenever somebody's got a problem, and he gets them to explain kind of what they're doing in their life and what kind of coping mechanisms they're using and everything. And then he says, well, how's that working for you? And it's quite brilliant, really, because that is the question, isn't it? It's, if you look at the strategy I was using with opiates, and I asked myself how that's working, I said, well, it worked very well for a short period of time. It works a little bit for a little bit of time. And now towards the end, it barely works at all. And in fact, I got a lot of problems that are piling up here and I can't deal with them. So you could say it's not working very fucking well at all, you know?
Yeah.
And then, that's when you've got a problem. It's a manageability issue. Is it working for you or is it not? And if it's not working for you, then you better make a change.
Yeah. And this is, it's so absurd to look back on. Like I think of, I was using it as a means of coping with a whole lot of things that were going on in my life and a whole lot of ways that I was feeling. And I was measuring the, how functional I was based on material things. But if I had by that point it was too late, but looking at, like, was it working for my mental health? Was it making my mood better? Was it getting rid of my negative thinking? Was it making all of the traumatic shit that I had experienced go away? Well, for like the time that I was high, but all of that traumatic, awful shit was still right back there. Not even the next day, by later in that day, it didn't go anywhere. So it was but as I've sort of said in the past, in our past episode, that drug kind of takes on a voice and kind of takes on a persuasive characteristic. It holds a place in the brain where it lies and says, that it is working. It convinces you that it is working. And I don't know that it would have been possible for me to break that without stopping taking the drug. Like, I don't think it would have been. I think that would have just sort of perpetuated itself over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that because it's like, for both of us, I think when you're getting that level of reinforcement, and what I mean by that is that drug is still providing you with enough positives, and it's very vocal in your mind. Like you said, it works the opposite of how I normally am, where I'm looking around and I'm seeing negatives. That part of my mind that the drug is using as a voice is the opposite. It's romanticizing all the time. And even when even now when I think about it, it shows my mind good times, comfortable times. It wants to remind me about how good it was. And it's bizarre that it has that kind of power even now to do that, Yeah. It's fascinating that it can sort of stay in your mind and have its own little entity there. And I don't, we've talked about it before, but I don't think that little entity is ever going to go away. It's just going to sit there and it's going to talk about how good OxyContin is. And, and I just kind of got to sit there and be like, all right, yeah, whatever, man.
But it's that the voice that is truly ours. And it is like that part of the brain that we own, that is our personality traits, our ability to cope, our ability to manage stress, all of these things that are what make us a human. And I think recovery teaches us to put those parts of the brain into the gym and beef them up. And so the ability to talk back to that voice strengthens, and then like that clarity of what was actually going on really, again, comes with time and comes with stepping away. And again, like, so I mentioned this in one of the episodes about like looking back at myself now, or looking at myself now and then looking at the Corey from when I was using. I'm almost physically disgusted by the thought because of all of the ways that it made me feel. For example, the nausea and vomiting that would come with opiate use for me, especially, later in the game when the dosing was getting higher. Well, any other life circumstance that you put yourself in that induces nausea and vomiting, that is your body is rejecting something, and your body is sending your brain a clear message that something is wrong and this isn't working.
Mm-hmm. Or world-class constipation is also a
right.
wonderful side effect.
Right. So why on earth would you continue to put yourself in that position? Well, the voice of the drug is there, and that whole hook and the whole loop that's happening is there. But now I look back and I think, ooh, I don't want to feel that way. Like the cost benefit analysis that we do says all of those other things make it really, really undesirable.
Yeah, that's a healthy place to be.
Yeah,
because I was that early on for me, I was not there. I was still romanticizing, and I don't think I even realized to what extent I was romanticizing. So when I see somebody who's, you're less than a year out, I think, is that right?
Over 14 months out.
Oh, 14 months. Okay. And you're talking like that. That's a good sign. I've noticed, it really, for smokers, when you hear a smoker and they've quit and they talk about it like that, where they're kind of disgusted by it, those people always seem to quit. And I think there's something there with they've kind of beat their own, they're seeing that drug for what it is, and they actually want to end that cycle of addiction, which is maybe the biggest factor. I believe it is the biggest factor.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's good. That's awesome, man. So I guess now that we've talked about these things, we could give people a little bit of an idea of some of the strategies that we used to deal with these personality traits that we know we have.
Yeah, for sure.
So a couple of the ones that we wrote down here is talking about establishing boundaries, which is a real popular kind of term to say. A lot of people throw that around, and I don't think very many people really sit down and think about what it means. Learning to say no. Again, you look at any self-help section, there's about 20 books on, the art of saying no, right?
Yeah.
People need a lot of coercion to be able to say no.
Yeah.
But it is important. And then putting yourself first. And I think both of us, I know for myself, I nearly drove myself over the edge by being so goddamn harsh to the interior of my mind was so brutal, and I was being so negative and so hard on myself that you eventually realize, like, okay, well, if you're not going to cut yourself some slack, and if you're not going to be on your own team and start treating yourself like you're, a friend, then you might as well throw in the towel now, because you're never going to make it. You can't succeed in that kind of battle where you're not on your own team. And it took me right to the edge to figure that out. I was it was probably a good year of just grinding it out against myself, trying to justify my actions, or, just a horrible kind of dialogue. And it's not the way to go.
No, that's right.
Put it that way. But let's start with boundaries, I guess. Maybe since you're not back to nursing, but there's probably other areas in your life where you've probably had to kind of put up boundaries, I guess, or make decisions based on where these boundaries need to be. And I think something that helped me understand how to do that was to first prioritize what was important to me.
Yeah.
So, and this is something that I do every 1 to 3 months. I'll sit there. I have a list, and I look at my list, and okay, what is the most important thing in the world to you? What and you start with, whatever you got at the top, your family, and you got your dog and your job, and money is somewhere on there. And, so all these things kind of fluctuate a little bit depending on, what part of the list you're looking at. But if you don't have a clear idea of what matters to you, and it doesn't, you'd think it's obvious, but it's not really obvious, because a lot of times you're going to have to kind of do Sophie's choice, right? It's going to be, there's somebody pulling from this way and there's somebody pushing from that way. Now, what do we do here? And you don't want to be trying to build a fence in the middle of a trespassing event. You want to kind of have this thing established in your mind. So do you have examples of times when you've kind of had to use that technique?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think for me, just to build on what you said for a sec, you're talking about the hierarchy of values. So the thing that strikes me is that, the first couple of times I did that exercise, my mental health and my sobriety didn't make the cut, didn't make the top 10 list. But like you, all of the other things that you said, my home, my family, my son, money, employment, they were all on the list. Mm-hmm. And so for a big part of upholding boundaries for me has been recognizing that is the first, that my mental health, putting that at the top makes all of the other things, literally every single one of them, fall into place so much easier, and strengthens each and every one of them.
Yeah.
And strengthens my boundaries. So if I've mentioned this before, that the message that we give ourselves when we allow our boundaries to be tread on, either in an interaction with someone out in the public, or someone in our personal lives, or an employer, where we say, yeah, I'll take on more, or yeah, I don't want to do that. That doesn't work for me, but I'll just do it because then it's done. I think for me that there's a message that I'm giving myself in that. And that message when I do that is saying I'm of lesser importance.
Yeah.
So to have interactions where I say, no, raising this issue or sitting in that challenging interaction for the couple of minutes that it will take, the payoff for me is that my mental health will remain intact and I won't be ruminating about that later on. And I won't be betraying myself. And I'm giving myself positive reinforcement by telling myself that I'm important. And that can be as simple as encountering someone in a grocery store. Here's an example: encountering someone that I've known in a grocery store, and they might know my story about why I'm off work and what happened to me, and it's a weird interaction. And it's an interaction that makes me think, oh, Jesus, they're looking right through my soul, and they know everything that's up with me, and they're judging me. It is, in fact, a boundary for me to be able to have that interaction and walk away and say, this might not be about me, or I know that I'm doing all right. I've done all these things to get my life together, and I can walk away with my head held high. A boundary isn't always about that challenging interaction and being assertive and saying
not at all.
Saying no, but it might be about not picking up that thought. So there's a boundary that can exist out in public interaction, but there's also a boundary within our own brain where we say, no, not going to go there this time.
Yeah, it's about knowing yourself and knowing your limits and why it's detrimental to yourself to exceed those limits. Work is the most obvious example of that. And, the whole healthcare work yourself to death kind of badge of honor thing. How silly that is when you step away and you look at it for what it is. And it's basically, if you're allowing that system to have that kind of priority in your life, then how else can you take that? It's like you said, you're saying, I'm aware that if I take that extra shift, I'm going to be a shitty pharmacist. I might even say something to a customer that they don't deserve, or handle a situation in a less than optimal way because I'm done and I shouldn't be in the pharmacy anyway. Yeah. But if you're not acknowledging that and you're just punching through all the time, well, yeah, of course how does that make you feel about yourself? Right. It's like,
yeah,
who's watching out for you? It's got to be you.
That's right.
So
that's right.
I think that's probably one of the, if we're talking to healthcare professionals out there, don't get caught in that nonsense trap where you're getting that pat on the back for, pulling the extra shift or doing whatever it is they want you to do, when that's, your job is maybe 9 on your priority list, right? And you're sacrificing number 2, number 4, and number 6 to pull that extra shift. That is going to form cognitive dissonance immediately.
That's right.
Because your actions are out of line with your priorities and what you actually value. That's the actual definition of cognitive dissonance. So don't be surprised that if you're going to continue in that course of action, you're going to start to feel kind of off. It's not a grounding feeling. It's the opposite of that. And I think that's the start of the unraveling, where you can get to a place where you're starting to reach around looking for something to hold on to. And unfortunately, that can be, a substance for some people.
Yeah. And no knock on overtime or those who pick up overtime, but it's in the working world, it's actually reinforced, and not everyone who picks up overtime is betraying themselves.
No.
But I think all of us can think of a time where, last minute we've been put on the spot. where you're in a situation where you gotta stay extra, or you gotta take on more, and there's a financial incentive,
Mm-hmm.
and that does temporarily soften the blow, or make that thought more manageable. But at the end of the day, if you're sleep deprived and not eating when you should, and taking on more stress and then bringing that home and stuff, I would question how much it's worth it.
Well, this is the thing that it's an easier thing to see if you're looking from the outside in.
For sure.
Like I had a guy I was working with a couple of years ago, and he was doing really well. He's maybe, I don't know, the guy's maybe doing like 600,000 or 700,000 a year. He's getting into that echelon of, you're fairly wealthy. He's got a few houses, and he's got a wife and kids, and his wife is, having a hard time with the kids, and he's not the guy who it just refuses to help her, refuses to, it's I guess a cultural thing maybe, but that's the woman's job, and his job is to make money. And I started to notice this guy's making some pretty big mistakes. And I said, man, like, even if you look at this from a financial point of view, how about you cut down to, like, how about your new goal is 350,000 for this year, and you don't get divorced? And he's like, that's not going to happen. 8 months later, he's in divorce proceedings, and he's going to lose, for sure. He's going to lose 2 of his houses. He's going to lose a couple cars. He's going to lose a shitload more than the whatever 3 or 400,000 that it would have cost. Even if he would have achieved that year. It's just the inability to. And I don't, like I said, it's a lot easier for somebody on the outside to see that when you're in it, and you've got yourself convinced that, some people put a value, like their job and the amount of money they make is a huge part of their identity. And, I think we have to acknowledge that. And in no way are we saying that it's wrong to work hard. It's just that you need to pay attention to whether or not the work that you're doing is in alignment with your real priorities. If that is your priority, to make money, that's the number one, then absolutely go after it, man. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think, like you said, they're just in healthcare. There's too many people who just get kind of coerced into taking a shift when they're not really thinking about it. Maybe they're fatigued already, and they're not making a very good decision. But it's those, because the line wasn't already drawn. Where I have a maximum on what I'll do for full-time work. And other than that, I'm 3 days a week in a pharmacy. That's my rule.
Yeah.
And I know that's what it's got to be, because if I exceed a certain number of shifts, then, I can see a change in my performance. I can see it starts to affect my sleep. I'm carrying a lot more tension, and it trickles down into other aspects of my life that are more important to me than that job. So it's a priority kind of triage, I guess you could call it.
For sure. And if neural pathways exist based on a starting point, a stimuli, and then sort of the reward, even if you're fatigued and you're worn out and you've got all of the stress, then you get the strokes for picking up the slack and being the person who pulls the 16-hour shift, and that you're going to get double time and a half or whatever. You are reinforcing that pathway each time you do it, and you're getting a little dopamine kick each time you do it. And
that's
gets
true.
Easier.
Yep.
It gets easier and easier to do it, all the while you may or may not be sacrificing what's most important to you, or telling yourself that your health and well-being is actually a priority.
Yeah. And it doesn't, I think it's easier for people to understand that. I don't know, if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and think of it like that, and you've got at the bottom, we need to have our health. If we don't have our health, it doesn't, the rest of the stuff. I mean, if you're in the hospital in intensive care, your priorities have shifted quite a lot.
Yes.
And then if you layer mental health right on top of that and just look at it from my health on the very bottom, and then mental health is next. This is the platform for everything that allows me to continue to function as a human being in a way that is, kind of constructive, and keeps me out of, you're still going to get into trouble. You're still going to have problems, but you're going to have a better chance if you focus on those two as the foundation to your entire, persona.
Yes.
And if you can do that and put the emphasis on mental health and physical health and health in general, then, you've got a way better chance of staying out of trouble. And that's kind of how, like you said, when you first did your hierarchy of priorities, you didn't even have mental health on there. And that's a common thing that happens. Lots of people they can be in active addiction. They won't even put their drug of choice on the list. No. When really the drug of choice should be number one. And that's that part of, don't just answer the question, think about it. Like, be honest, dig, what really is motivating you? What really is number one? Yeah. Is the OxyContin number one, or is your wife number one? Think about it. Yeah. And face the reality of that, whatever question and whatever answer comes back, that it does you no good to pretend that it's any other way than what it is. You have to have that figured out. Once you got that figured out, then you can start making adjustments.
Yeah. Or it will bite you in the ass.
Oh, yeah. It's
every time.
There's no fooling yourself. No. I mean, you're going to try to, and it's part of the whole package of the problem. But the less you can fool yourself and the more you can be honest, be kind, and advocate for yourself as a, like I said, you got to be on your own team, and you got to be, you have to be, because honestly, I mean, we're all blessed with, we both have good people in our lives, lots of support and stuff like that. But even then, you can't expect those people to be able to make those kind of decisions for you. They don't know what your priorities are. They don't know what goes on inside your head. So you have to figure that out, and you have to decide what's important, and then figure out a way to stand by it in a way that makes sense to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, if you don't mind, that kind of leads us to the next kind of trick or tool that I've learned in this process that has really helped me. We're skipping over one, but what comes to mind for me is self-compassion, and how I have learned that through this process of recovery, and how I wish I had that much earlier on. Because all of these personality traits that we've been talking about here tonight, perfectionism, sensitivity, they are sort of the opposite of self-compassion. They are the voice that is telling you that you're not enough, and that you're not good, and that you've got all this pain that you can't manage, and etc. But the practice of self-compassion has really helped to mend that. The way that I've gained that is through connection, and through universal experiences, and seeing us seeing the universality of all people. And that's through groups. So getting connected to the groups that I've gotten connected to, hearing other people's stories, hearing other people's struggles, it's far easier, because I'm an empathetic person by my nature, which I didn't give myself a whole lot of credit for before, but I am that. Mm-hmm. And if I can look at other people and say, wow, your story is heavy. Wow, you're carrying a lot of pain, and you've been through such a journey, and those moments must have been really hard. It over time has become easier to turn that lens onto myself and say, well, if we're all in the same boat here, we all faced addiction. Am I really different from all of these people in these different groups that I'm in? Well, that's, if I actually write it down and look at myself side by side with all these people, I'm no different. Then it's much easier to turn that lens to myself and say, Corey, you cut yourself a little bit of slack here. And that perfectionism where you're telling yourself you're not enough and you had to do more and take on more, that's not rational. That's not reasonable. That notion that you can just carry more and more and more burden and that you'll, sort of be a martyr for the cause. That's not rational and reasonable either. Mm-hmm. I did a fascinating thing. So the image for the Recovery Machine podcast is a clay figure that I did during art therapy. The two clay figures that I did, and I did them specifically with specific individuals in mind that I encountered at work, people who had died of overdose. And I did it as a way of kind of trying to release that memory. And did those over a year ago, and they've sat on a shelf in my house. And I had occasion to revisit those clay pieces as you and I were starting this process, and came to think that would be a really interesting image. And then it struck me in conversations that I had that was me. I was doing those figures about myself subconsciously, or at least that if I see the pain in that other individual and see that other individual's experience, that because I am having had the same struggles, that was me there. And it is by fortune and grace and luck that I didn't end up in that same state, having died. But when I re-looked at that clay image, I thought, holy shit, I'm looking at myself here. I'm not looking at this guy that died 3 or 4 years ago that, was stuck in my memory. Mm-hmm. If that is him and we are the same, then that is me. Yeah. And so that's something that has to be practiced. And the other piece that I was thinking about was self-acceptance. And self-acceptance is different than self-compassion, because it's you're telling yourself that you are all right. And I think part of that also means accepting that other people are all right too.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're hard on everyone else, then you're probably hard on yourself, right?
That's right. Yeah. Compassion and acceptance, I think, kind of have to go hand in hand. And it's an active practice to again, to kind of, like I've used the analogy of strengthening that muscle. But compassion and acceptance are a part of forgiveness, or forgiveness is a part of compassion and acceptance, I think. And oh man, the sooner we do that, the sooner I did that, it was like such a literal weight off my shoulders.
Oh yeah. That was I think I was in the most danger. Like I was never more dangerous to myself than when I was in that state of not accepting. And, there was no tolerance for myself and what happened. I would not allow for the mistakes that were made. And that's a quick drive to a really terrible mind space. And I feel it when you say, when you reach a point and you're like, okay, this isn't helping. I got to find a way to get on my own team. And then things start to line up, and you've got a chance to start seeing things a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so easy to look back at you could probably answer this better than I could, but I'm not sure that it exists, that there's a healthcare worker who became addicted at work or outside of work, who isn't brutally hard on themselves, and who isn't then who doesn't have that part of their story weigh them down for a period of time. And it's that would be very rare. I've never heard of such a thing. No. And so that self-downing, that beating ourselves up, really kind of not only perpetuates the depression and perpetuates that rough state of mental health, but it itself puts us at risk.
Well, big risk.
like for relapse and for
relapse and suicide. That's
relapse and suicide. Yeah.
Yeah. It was suicide was the one that what I realized was that, that idea was starting to turn over in my head too frequently. And I was like, this is what's going to happen here, man. If you don't change the rhetoric inside your mind, you're going to talk yourself into ending this shit. And that is not an acceptable solution to this problem at this point in time. So figure it out, man. And I mean, that for me, that's what it got to, as I realized it. And I wasn't, that was more of a concern to me than, I mean, I don't know. I was in a situation where I didn't have ready access because I'd taken myself out of that, particular danger. But regardless, I mean, it would be the same way. If you get to the point where you're driving yourself that crazy, and you had your substance of choice sitting there, yeah, of course, no human can withstand that kind of constant punishment when the relief is right there. I mean, it's obvious what would happen.
So what about patience? To me, patience with ourselves is another huge part of the solution. When you were in that place, how did you tell yourself, like, give yourself that patience regarding the time that this was going to take, and the fact that there isn't a quick, immediate fix apart from suicide?
Well, I rejected that idea for a long time, and continued in that cycle of where I was just kind of hanging on the edge there, and I was just keeping myself together by like distraction, right? Like meditation and reading for as long as I could, and then I could only, there would be a certain time that I couldn't just, if I, had to like talk to people and stuff like that. If I was left by myself, I would just start thinking, and there was no attempts at cutting myself slack towards patience with the process. It wasn't until I realized that how dangerous my thinking was becoming that I started to kind of take a little more care and be like, hey man, like, how about we do this? How about we, I said, what if, like, take somebody I really, really care about, like my sister, for instance. Now, let's say my sister is in the same situation I'm in right now. Okay. Now let's look at that and tell me what you would tell her. What would you say to her? Say, well, okay, first thing is like, Jesus, it's not, people make mistakes, and you look at it from a step out of yourself and then project that back onto somebody you care about instead of staying within and just beating the shit out of yourself. When I started to do that, I realized, I go, okay, well, this is a better strategy. I have to kind of treat myself as if I do give a shit about myself. Right. So by doing that, by kind of stepping outside of myself and almost like, I guess how you would, is like parenting yourself or something. Right. So by doing that, I was able to to get sort of a process started where I'd be like, okay, well, you know what? We're not gonna ruminate on that for now. We're gonna deal with this other little thing that we got going, and here's what we're gonna do. Here's the plan, and we got tiny little steps that we're gonna try and do each day that are gonna put us on a better kind of road towards a healthier cultivation of that inner dialogue. And that's all we're gonna do. We're just gonna keep working on that, and it's gonna take time. Just time is, that's what we got. That's what we're going to use. And it's going to be hard. Yeah, it's going to be hard, but it's possible, and once you start, because you can't, I mean, you wouldn't say that to somebody you care about. You wouldn't be like, hey, this is impossible, you idiot. No, look what you've done. That's not how you would help that person. So why on earth would you do that to yourself? It's it's once I made that kind of connection that I couldn't treat myself that way, then I was able to give myself enough time and space to do a better job of advocating.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great point and then the thing that came to mind for me was that as you were doing that, you were also developing skills of coping in that, okay, when I am feeling at my worst, here's something I can do. I can go meditate. I can exercise. I can read. I can distract. I don't think there's anything wrong with healthy distraction to teach ourselves the ability of to get through those moments.
No, it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah. And not, I think, not every single moment, and this is where, recovery burnout can be a real thing, that there are moments where you have to really put pen to paper, sometimes literally, and figure it out. And then there are also moments where you have to just get through them.
Yeah.
And come out the other side of them. And then you can say, wow, I came out the other side of that. And I changed my thinking, or I didn't resort to an unhealthy behavior. I didn't use a substance. I reached out, maybe. And that's
this is what a mentally healthy person does. They they process stuff as it comes along in a way that doesn't derail them. They're able to, take hits and keep coming forward. That's the key.
Yeah, that's right. And reaching out has been another thing for me of how to manage all these things about my personality, that is to afford myself the opportunity to let people know who I am. And every single person in my life who I've let know who I am has said, God, we're so much happier to know this guy than the guy who is like secretive and self-isolating and withdrawn. And even and the good with the bad. And again, I know that we are very, very fortunate to have a very healthy circle of people around us, but taking that risk of putting ourselves out there, and that could for some people, that is groups and recovery groups or team activities or whatever that may be. But every time that we do that, it's establishing a healthy pattern, I think,
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, the way I look at it is, this is, if I'm coming at you with my greatest semblance of an authentic Nathan and you don't like it, then I don't, that's okay. But, we don't need to be friends or whatever. That's not a big deal. And I think that's kind of an important realization too. Like, just because, if you're a person who's comfortable with talking about this stuff or whatever, I mean, some people aren't, and some people are going to react poorly to that, and there's going to be an automatic stigma attached to you as an individual, and I mean, that's that person's issue, So, yeah, I the way I look at it is the same way you do. I think it's the more that you can, if I can my main focus is to be honest with myself, and that's the absolute priority, and then honest with other people after that.
For sure. Yeah. For sure. And it sounds so easy when we're saying it. And while you're doing it, you're in the middle of the trenches. But it sure helps.
Yes, sir. So I think that's about it for this topic. Hey,
yeah,
I think we did an okay job of looking at those things. There's quite a bit there, and there's some interesting stuff. If anyone has any questions and want to get a hold of us again, it's us at recoverymachine.org. That's us@recoverymachine.org. Shoot us an email or get a hold of us via Spotify or YouTube, and we'd be happy to discuss any of this stuff with you. So
Yeah, absolutely.
should we leave it there?
We'll leave it there. Yeah. And, as we said last time, thanks to everyone who's tuning in and listening with us. And hopefully it sparks conversations within people's homes, within workplaces. And if there's anyone out there who's listening and struggling right now, maybe it's of some help. I think, as we said earlier, there were so far this year, there have been 1,782 deaths in our province from overdose. And that's far too many. And there's just countless lives that are impacted. So I think at the very least to be having this kind of a conversation about the experience and about ways out. Let's keep the conversation going, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Information is key.
Yeah.
All right, Corey, we will talk next time. And thanks to everybody for listening.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. See you soon.